Andrew, thanks for being with us again and chatting to us about church planning issues. And the particular one we want to talk about today is culture. How did you find yourself integrating your culture into the culture around you, or even defining your culture against that culture? It's a prickly topic. It can be full of all sorts of worries. Give us an idea of how you proceeded.
Yeah, look, we proceeded firstly by working out that it did matter to do something along these lines. Do you know what I mean? Lots of friends, lots of other theological-minded people have come at it by saying, look, the gospel's the power. Worrying about the superficialities of culture and so on is selling out. Now, there is, of course, truth in that. The gospel is the power of God for salvation, and prayerfully applying that in a loving community is a very powerful thing. You can be very out of touch with the culture, but if you've got this deep and profound love of Christ that's alive and well, it is quite astonishing and so on. But what I notice in 1 Corinthians 9, of course, is that Paul, for the sake of saving, becomes, as a Jew for the Jew, a Gentile for the Gentile, those without the law and so on. And so I noticed that Paul pays attention to cultural issues and seeks to minimise their impact in his communication processes. And so I figure the apostle cares about it to some degree. He's the one who wrote Romans 1, verse 16 and 17. So he cares about it, which means I think we need to recognise it's part of our humanity that there is this cultural reality. And it's not just the difference between a culture of Australian culture and Chinese, Asian culture. What we've noticed, and I dare say many have too, that even amongst the kind of white Anglo culture, we all look the same. We all have two eyes and so on. Most of us have two eyes. But the fact is, that superficial ways and quite deep ways too, we're different. And I felt this as someone growing up, Manly Beach. My world was the beach world. And I was converted into an Anglican church, and it was always this shift between cultures, and I sensed it a great deal. And so I'm aware as we moved up here onto the Central Coast that if we're going to reach the people I grew up with, then we couldn't do it like the churches I'd been part of was doing it. They're just so much different. So that meant I was conscious of these things, seeking to pay attention to these things. But further, it's interesting the way Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 9. He was a Jew who says, I became a Jew to the Jews, which flags an issue that's really important, I think. It's called the third way. The first way is to be converted to Jesus in my culture, the Jew who becomes a Christian. The second way is for that conversion to be so profound that I'm converted out of my culture. So now Jewishness doesn't matter to me. I'm free of Jewishness. I'm just Christ's person. The third way is being so free from my Jewish culture that I can now be a non-Jew to reach non-Jews, or go back into Judaism to reach my Jewish brothers. That's the way Paul takes it. And so it's interesting, as we've worked in this climate here, we've sought to find men and women who, say in the surfing culture, it's a very powerful culture. We've sought to find men who, particularly, and I'm thinking of the guys, we've got very good guys in this light who are very much part of that culture, but they've been converted out of it sufficiently that they can go back into it without being absorbed by it, without being owned by it, and without being tripped up by its idols, which means they're well positioned to craft our ministries in such a way that we are that culture, to reach that culture without being ruled by that culture. And so there's the kind of theological principle undergirdings we operate with. We're wanting to strip away things that might be barriers to a certain subculture. The best ones to do that are the ones who have just been converted out of it. The good ones to do it are the ones converted out of it. The best ones who have been converted out of it and can sit over it now and come back into it. And so I early on tried to pay attention to those kind of people. I was aware that I was shaped by a church culture over a time, by a theological culture. And so I worked hard to pay attention to people who were still back in that world and see the things that they were seeing, see it through their eyes, to seek to actually reach back into that world. It's been quite a battle. It's been quite a challenge, but we've sought to create a unique church that fits, that has no superficial cultural problems, so that people can come and hear the radically cross-cultural, counter-cultural message in a climate that feels like theirs.
Actually, it's interesting too that you raise this idea of being tripped up by the idols of the culture. Maybe you'd like to extrapolate on that a bit, because I wonder, sometimes people feel like they're being very much engaged in a culture because they've got the right lighting, because they've got the right copy, because they've got the right thing, but they actually might be in danger of being tripped up by those things. How would you see that?
Yeah, one of the keys is Paul in 1 Corinthians 9. So it's interesting, his Jewishness wasn't who he was anymore. So he could be a non-Jew to reach non-Jews. And I think, say, pick a surfer. You worry about the maturity of a surfer who can't be a non-surfer to reach non-surfers, because their identity is still the surfer. And if you can't let go of that to be something else, you've been tripped up by it. Your identity is actually there and not in Christ. And so that's why it's been very important for us to have men who can step out and over and be above, to see things that otherwise you can't see when you're in it. So the latte culture, the hipster thing, too often that's driven by who I need to be, rather than genuinely I'm being this for the sake of others. And really, you almost need guys who are part of that, converted out of it, and have lived into a culture they've despised long enough to realise their identity is now no longer hipster, that they can come back into it in a healthy way and be engaged properly.
I wonder actually, when you're evaluating people for church planting, because I know you do this through Geneva Push, whether you pay attention to that as to whether or not this person is embracing this culture because this is more of who they want to be, then it's because they see that this is a group that needs to be reached or something like that.
It's something we're aware of, but there's a reality everyone's still on the journey to maturity, and so we all carry vestiges of our identity that are caught up in, there's certain cars I can't own because of who I am. I can't own a Tarago because like one of my sons said,
because you're male, and I
just can't, and I know there's a maturity issue for me there. Do you know what I mean? I need to be able to get over it. So we're all on this journey. There's some parts I'm not prepared to go far enough into my maturing, but so you face the fact that we're all moving, but you want to see that there's enough self-awareness that they can see those problems in themselves, which means they're probably more likely to see the potential trip-ups in themselves.
So I guess that one of the things you'd say is be very well aware of the culture you come from and the effect it has over you.
Yeah, the more it's Calvin's insight, isn't it? That the two knowledges, the knowledge of God and knowledge of self. And as I know God better, it actually feeds and fuels my ability to know myself better, which actually then helps me know God better. And you want to see that in leaders of churches. You want to see that as they know God better, they're actually more reflective on themselves. They're seeing what's happening in themselves so that they're better able to be what needs to be to minister to people of all different backgrounds.
Andrew, I feel like you've just given us like a dozen things to think through, so I'm going to stop this now before my brain overloads. Mate, thank you very much for the opportunity. We're going to put an email address up so that people can see they've got the opportunity to actually put more questions to you. But in the meantime, I guess we'll just look forward to the next one. Thanks.